Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of On the Ballot. I'm your host, Norm Leahy. I'm a senior editor here at Ballotpedia. And, of course, every month we sit down and have something that's called office hours. And we have those office hours with our founder and CEO, Leslie Graves, who's kind enough to join us today. Leslie, welcome back to On the Ballot. Good to have you.
Yeah, great to be here, Norm. Thanks.
And I know I enjoy these very much because I always learn something from you, and I hope our audience feels the same way. But let's cut to the chase. There's a big election coming up, and depending on where you live, it's probably the most important thing politically that's going on right now. And we know that on Ballotpedia's end, we'll not only be covering the statewide elections in New Jersey, Virginia, Prop 50 in California. We'll be covering ourselves will be covering 13,000 local elections. That's things like city councils, school boards, and whatnot. But this is really just a prelude. The big thing, the midterm elections, they begin almost before all of the ballots are counted in these elections, right?
Yep.
And that means we've got a huge challenge right now on our plate to not only cover many more elections at all levels of government, but to give people what we call robust information, the information that goes beyond just the name and the office. So can you give our listeners an idea of the scope of this challenge and what we're planning to do to try to meet it?
Sure, but before we go on, there are big elections this year, as you mentioned, in New Jersey and Virginia. Each of them are electing a governor and number of state legislative seats. And then there's the infamous and or famous Prop 50 in California, which is about redistricting. There's another, Texas every 2 years, but always in the odd year, votes on proposed constitutional amendments to their state constitution. And those elections are also taking place this November. So Texans, a lot of people live in Texas, and they have to consider what they want to do about those proposed constitutional amendments. And I will also say, though, that typically the voter turnout for those state constitutional amendments is less than 10%.
Less than
that's worth.
Yeah.
Just saying.
No, and I think you're right, because Texas generally, because their legislature doesn't meet every year, they generally pile on the amendments in these elections, don't they?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, but then you're right. The day after the election, we'll have several days of everybody having a hot take on what just happened, and then we're off to the races for the midterms. So typically, when people refer to the midterms, they mean the U.S. House elections and roughly 33, depending, U.S. Senate elections that will take place in November of 2026. For us, it's different because we will start covering those primaries right away in March. So the first primaries for those seats take place in March. And then there are some in March, April, May, June, all the way through to August about who's going to be on the ballot for the general election. And there will also be 50 or 60,000 lower down the ballot elections in dozens of states for city council, school board, and so forth. And we will be covering those elections. And we are really on a multi-year journey to invite both our readers to go along on that journey with us and learn more about those people. And we're inviting those candidates who are running for those offices or who occupy those seats to join with us on the journey of helping us give plenty of information about themselves so our readers can size them up.
Normally, Leslie, when people would look for information about candidates, they would look to the local newspaper. They would look to local TV or radio. Mm-hmm. Those are increasingly either not covering races or the outlets simply don't exist anymore. And in some areas, there have been attempts to replace them with digital media, which is a new thing, still growing, yet doesn't cover all of the races everywhere. And that's sort of an issue for us as well as voters, correct?
Well, sure, because for us to find information about a newspaper that endorsed some candidates or did profiles of them or, information about them, we would want to look and see what newspapers in their area had to say about it so that we can create a well-rounded picture of them. So, right. So starting in about the year 2000 is when newspapers started dying because of the digital environment. So it's just been a gradual slide and hasn't stopped. So like every year there will still be more newspapers that go out of business. It's a tough business to be in. And the newspapers that haven't gone out of business often are thinner than they used to be. So all newspaper publishers and all news publishers that are digital, not everybody has a digital footprint. There's still a lot of local papers like mine near where I live in Spring Green that does not have a digital copy of it, but which is not entirely beside the point, and I'll get to that in a minute, right? So there are fewer newspapers to cover these candidates, making it harder for anybody to find information about them. Yep.
And so when we come up to something like a midterm election where you said
Mm-hmm.
there would be 50 to 60,000
Right.
local elections?
Yeah. So one of the things that's funny about that is that let's say you're talking about the school board in Houston, a very large city. I actually don't know off the top of my head whether there are 7 or 9 people on that school board. It's somewhere in that vicinity. But then if you drive, 200 miles away from Houston and you get to some county in Texas that also has a school board, that school board may also have 7, 8, 9 people on it, but it may be a school district with only 1,000 voters and maybe only 150 kids. It just depends. There are a lot of variables here. Well, it's still that many candidates. So the number of candidates in the rural areas that have very little coverage is still many, many candidates. So when I mentioned that there would be 60 or 70,000 hyperlocal, as we call them, candidates on the ballot in 2026 and really every year, many of them numerically are on the ballot in smaller jurisdictions that for sure don't have newspapers anymore.
But these are, I've said this many times in different venues, is that these local races this is where democracy really meets the people. It's a face-to-face interaction.
Yeah.
It's not something like we have with Congress, with the presidency, sometimes even with state legislators. These are the people that are probably your neighbors who serve on the school board. And yet we know increasingly less about these candidates who have the most effect on our lives. I mean, that's not healthy for democracy, is it?
Yeah, it's not a great thing. I will say that probably the areas that I worry about the most are the middle-sized entities. So if you're talking about like school board candidates in San Francisco, they have a very vibrant digital news environment in San Francisco. And they also happen to have, I think San Francisco has more of this than any place else. They also have a ton of civic organizations that issue endorsements as a civic organization. It might be the Progressive Club of San Francisco, or it might be the Conservative Gun Owners of San Francisco, whatever it is. There are a lot of them. And so there are a lot of sort of organizationally small organizations produced what they call voter guides in California, where they will, this community organization will issue analyses of, and they're really interesting. It's not the newspaper. It's a local sort of a civic club. There's a lot of it there. I'd like to see a lot of that spring up all over the country because it's got quite a bit of fun for people to do that. Anyway, then you've got your very small, jurisdictions with very many voters. In jurisdictions that don't have very many voters, the people who are running for office talk to the voters because there aren't very many of them. So there is contact with the candidates because it's very human scale. You maybe to get elected, maybe you only need to talk to 90 people and they may already know you, right? So that it's the ones in the middle. So the cities and counties and whatnot that I worry about are cities like with about 50,000 population, in that maybe 40,000 to 100,000 in there, where they are not very apt to have some of them don't have newspapers anymore. They're not as apt to have this kind of civic club yet. Maybe some people in those cities might think about it. So, but you're not gonna meet your candidate in a town of 50,000 people.
So that's a challenge, obviously, not only for us but for voters. But going into the midterm, and you know this because you see it, almost all of the resources that are left in the media nationally and among organizations and interest groups is focused on Congress and to the exemption of everything else. That's not healthy either.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like one time this is probably 8 or 9 years ago, we got a call from one of the big national newspapers, and they asked us what we plan to do by way of covering local elections in the coming year. And we were talking about it and all. And by local elections, I interpret county commission, school board, maybe state legislature in a pinch. It turned out when they said the word local election, they meant U.S. House election.
Really?
Yeah. Well, for them it is local. It's some U.S. House district in flyover country. It's local.
I never thought about. Well, I suppose if you have a national footprint, like let's just say the New
Yeah.
York Times, that yeah, upstate New York, which could also be terra incognita, unknown land. Yeah, that qualifies. But can you? So there are obviously challenges ahead, and
Yeah.
we have means to overcome them. But can you give us a taste of what kind of coverage that we can look forward to from Ballotpedia in
Sure.
2026?
Right. So, there's an endless amount of information that you can get about any human individual that's, online, including candidates. But most of that information that somebody might skulk around on the internet and discover about you is irrelevant to whatever it is that you may think and plan to do when you run for office. So there's only a limited amount of information that's relevant to that a voter would regard as relevant. So since we have to guard our resources, any voter education group would have to, including newspapers, would have to guard their resources. We have to hone in on getting some really great pieces of information that are very informative to the voter. So we've talked in previous versions of this ongoing conversation that you and I are having, Norman, about candidate surveys, candidates filling that out for Ballotpedia. That's extremely informative. In some cases, they might fill out a candidate survey for a different organization, which might be a special interest organization. It might be the questionnaire for the local affiliate of the National Rifle Association. However, those, if a candidate, answers all those questions, most voters, whatever their position is on the gun issue, will find those answers quite informative about whether they do or don't want to vote for that individual. So we love questionnaires, not just our questionnaires or surveys, but those of other organizations, and we look around to see them. But one of them that we're really doing a lot of extra work and really beefing up around right now is endorsements. And we're just talking here about the hyperlocal endorsements, school board, county commission, and whatnot. And there are a couple of actually tech companies emerging out of Silicon Valley that are trying to create platforms to make it much, much easier for new groups of voters to coalesce with each other digitally and coordinate with each other, to meet up online and issue voter guides for Amarillo, Texas, or whatever. Interestingly, they both, as I've gotten to know these groups, which we'll hopefully be doing some partnerships with, I hope you'll have an opportunity to interview them, Norm, grew out of San Francisco roots. So they believe in voter guides because they grew up seeing these voter guides. So they knew there was a very rich tapestry of that, and they found it really helpful. So in a lot of areas, that doesn't exist. That idea that that's a thing that you and your friends could do isn't a tradition yet in a lot of other counties and cities. And if these groups have their way, it might become a tradition. I think that would be really excellent.
So,
Just the act of getting together with friends or people who would become your friends through doing this project to scope out the candidates, maybe call them up, maybe have them in, meet at a coffee shop, get to know them, and then issue a digital voter guide. We would love that very much because then we could share that information with our voters. This would be really great.
So you're long story short, you're actually telling me something good could come from Silicon Valley.
Oh, well, yeah, they think, and the people in Silicon Valley think about scale and making it an app or a product that you could use anywhere and that's easy to use and that people are easily able to figure out how to use. They know how to think that through, right?
Yeah, I mean, good. So I'm glad that
I don't
that's
know how to think that through, but they know. I've seen their product. It looks pretty fancy. It looks pretty good to me.
yeah.
Um,
Well, my whole
so
set of
I
air.
think I think this would be a very good thing for democracy if they succeeded. And because they succeeded, groups elsewhere could do it. One of the folks that I talked to at one of these organizations shared with me that this is really typical. You think that if you grew up and there were 25 different motley organizations issuing their research and their endorsements on, dog catchers or whatever, that's probably the way it is elsewhere. So they actually sort of thought that was true, as one does. You're not, you think like the way your family is when you grow up, every family's like that. And you go to college and you're like, oh, no, no,
Yeah.
they're different. And they were going to expand into one of the major cities on the eastern seaboard and went looking for the voter guides, and there weren't any, like zero, in this particular very large city that's been around for a long time. And that is very interesting. Isn't that interesting?
It is. Yes, we all do stuff differently, and I'm sure that if they'd gone to a little town in New England, they would have probably tapped into the town meeting.
Yes. Well, that's actually interesting. It might be that cities in New England may not have coalesced around publishing printed, community-centric voter guides because of the verbal traditions of the town meetings. I don't know. I wish some political scientists would research this. It'd be
Yes,
interesting.
the genius of local American politics is
Yeah.
endlessly fascinating. But we have a lot to look forward to, a lot to cover in the coming year. Leslie, I know you're extraordinarily busy trying to bring all those threads together, so I don't want to detain you, but Leslie Graves, thank you for holding office hours with us here on the ballot. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Norm. It was great to talk to you today.
And to everybody, you can, of course, catch this wherever you listen to podcasts and see us on YouTube as well. And until next time, I'm Norm Leahy, and I will see you in the digital pages of Ballotpedia. Until then, take care.